Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome also from my side. It's really a pleasure to see you all back here in Berlin. It's my task and pleasure to introduce the first speaker to you, Vico's senior advisor, Peter Geimer, who has already been thanked by Barbara Stolberg-Rielinger. Peter Geimer is professor at Free University here in Berlin and director of Deutsches Forum für Kunstgeschichte in Paris. As a historian of art and of science, he was from the beginning of his intellectual trajectory interested in the relations between history and art. In his PhD, he explored the 18th century fascination with antique remains. He considered their decay over the centuries not to be a hindrance, as one might think, but rather as a condition of their popularity and of the intellectual stimulus that they evoked. The antique artifacts were fascinating because they were decaying, because the past they represented was in a way unattainable, and because the beholder encountered them in the lustful frustration that he came forever too late. From this venturing point, it is not surprising that Peter Geimer, in the course of his career, turned to photography. As a medium that can capture moments in time, photography has an intimate relation to history, but, and that is one of Peter Geimer's core hypotheses, this relation is everything but straightforward. Reflecting on pictures by mistake, as one of his books is called, Bilder aus Versehen, that is on photographs that have been altered or spoiled over time by physical or chemical impact, he questions the assumption that a photography is a willfully produced, permanently fixed image that mimics its object of reference. And this leitmotif comes back in his most recent book, Die Farben der Vergangenheit, wie Geschichte zu Bildern wird, The Colors of the Past, How History Becomes Image. Here, Geimer explores the relation of history and visibility, the evidence of images, or Bildevidenz, as we say in German, and that was also at the center of a long-term research project he conducted at Freie Universität Berlin. I think I don't need to say more to convince you that with Peter Geimer we have the ideal guide into our program, into the topic of our meeting. So, Peter, thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this very kind introduction. Thanks for inviting me. I was delighted to accept this invitation because I think it's excellent that the Wissenschaftskolleg has been awarding fellowships to photographers for several years now. And I'm delighted that Hannah Darabi, the current fellow, is here and will be talking about her work with Christian Joschke. And I'm delighted that Arvid Messmer, last year's fellow, is here with us today and will be discussing his work tomorrow. Since its invention in the early 19th century, photography has been a specific way of forming an image of the world, of analyzing the world through images, which is what the classical sciences also do, but in a different way, with different methods, different objectives, and different results. Of course, I don't know how your discussions here at the Wissenschaftskolleg are going, but I can imagine that the presence of photographers among the fellows encourages both sides to reflect on what research actually is and how various types of research differ from one another or might resemble one another. In the first part of my talk, I will try to give a definition of what photographic research might be. In the second part, I will go back to the very beginning of photography in the early 19th century in order to discuss some specific qualities of photography, qualities that, as I see it, distinguish photography from other visual arts or media, such as painting or drawing. And in the third part, I will present some examples of photographic research. So I have been asked to answer to the question, what is photographic research? This is no easy task, since photographic research, I wonder whether you agree, Hannah Darabi, is no discipline in the strict sense, such as cancer research, empirical research in sociology, or let's say medieval studies in the humanities. Photographic research is rather a visual practice, a kind of reflection based on photographic depictions. So this would be my first approach to answering the question. Photographic research is not research about photography, but research through photography with the help of photography. In short, it is photography as research. That needs to be explained, of course, because it refers to a different conception of research than in the classical sciences. Photographic research is expressed through images. In the humanities, research manifests itself in the form of written texts. In the natural sciences, research means conducting experiments, gathering data, interpreting data, measuring or working with formulas and graphs. Of course, modern sciences, as we know, also deal with numerous images, but as Lauren Deston and others have shown, these images usually are visualizations of data. So these images are closely linked to measurements and data. So it's another type of images than in photographic research, I suppose. Photographic research differs from these disciplines in that it is a different form of reflection, a form of reflection that takes place on the basis of images. I would even say, and that might be controversial already, photographic research does not develop a thesis, at least not in the sense of an academic discipline. Rather, it brings something to light. It does not argue with concepts, terms, and definitions. It explores the world, but it does so by presenting images, by relating images to each other, by recontextualizing images, by using photography to explore certain phenomena in the world. It brings photographs in dialogue with the real world, but also in dialogue with each other. So there is a form of argumentation that takes place in the visual realm. I also believe that photographic research should not be evaluated in the same way as the classical disciplines. This is a very current, topical, and controversial issue. Because art colleges have long been asking themselves whether the master's and bachelor degree system should be also applied to the arts. Some of them realized it, others, like Düsseldorf, still refuse to this idea. So the question is whether artists should be evaluated in the same way as scientists. I'm rather skeptical about this because I believe that this is a kind of assimilation that does not do justice to the specific character of artistic research and could possibly lead to unproductive standardization. But that's beside my point, and that's not our topic today. So I just said there is a form of argumentation that takes place in the visual realm. This distinguishes photographic research from other forms of photography. For example, fashion photography, advertising photography, or food photography. So let's take food photography. So you all are familiar with the phenomenon that people not only eat their meals, but also photograph them beforehand and post them on social media. I would say that in contrast to photographic research, these uses of photography do not intend to do research or to pose questions or to explore something. They have other uses, and I'm not making fun of it, but just to make clear that this is a completely different way of using photography. The subtitle of our conference already provides another answer to our question, what is photographic research? So the subtitle, explorations between documentation and art, and here I would like to emphasize the word between, because photographic research lies somewhere between documentation and art. It is neither academic research in the classical sense nor fine art in the classical sense. It combines documentary and artistic methods. I just take as one example Hannah Darabi's work Soleil of Persian Square. And I quote from a description from a gallery: "It is an investigation into the visual identity of the Iranian diaspora lifestyle in Los Angeles. It attempts to give a face to this fictional city called Tehran Angelus, so a mixture of Tehran and Angelus, which Hannah Darabi discovered through images associated with popular music in her teenage years. So just to show that this is a kind of photography that, of course, refers to aesthetic traditions, that, of course, refers to art, but at the same time is a specific kind of investigation. I'm going to briefly move into the field of literature and poetry. But in my opinion, this observation can also be applied to visual research. The German writer and poet Marcel Bayer once compared his work as a poet to that of an ornithologist. He lists a whole series of analogies between ornithology and poetry. In both fields, observation plays a crucial, major role. Both fields work on forms of representing the world. In the end, however, Marcel Bayer insists on a specific difference between these two areas, and I quote, "Poems are research in a different field than natural sciences, using different means, with a different subject matter, of course, but similar in their movement. There is one striking difference, however. In poems, a research movement can be traced, but unlike the work of an ornithologist, for example, they are not geared toward a research result. Poems have no result." End of quote. I will read this, only this quotation in German. Gedichte sind Forschung auf einem anderen Gebiet als der Naturwissenschaft, mit anderen Mitteln, einem anderen Gegenstand natürlich, aber in der Bewegung ähnlich. Wobei es eine markante Abweichung gibt. In Gedichten lässt sich eine Forschungsbewegung nachvollziehen. Auf ein Forschungsergebnis allerdings sind sie, anders als die Arbeit etwa eines Ornithologen, nicht ausgerichtet. Gedichte haben kein Ergebnis. It's a quite controversial phrase, I suppose. You can easily contradict to that, but however, it's interesting to think about. If you follow Marcel Bayer, research in art would be similar to scientific research in that both are expressions of a search movement. The English word research already shows this, as the French word la recherche. So it clearly articulates this movement. Research means searching for something that we didn't know before. But they differ, according to Marcel Bayer, in the falsification of their results. And of course, Marcel Bayer does not want to say that writing a poem is a random act without any inner coherence or concentrated work on language. But according to Bayer, the result of this work is not a way of informing us about the world. Poems are not a type of information. They are more a form of representation or Darstellung, as I would say in German. In my opinion, it is very important not to measure photographic research simply by the established standards of the classical sciences. If we do that, research in the humanities, natural sciences and social sciences would then taken as the norm, and any other form of research would appear to be a deviation from this norm. We would then only ever talk about what photography research is not, what it theoretically should be, but what unfortunately it is not. So I would therefore appear, it would therefore appear from the outset as something negative and deficient, and instead of trying to focus on its independence and specificity. So now I come to my second point, which is a kind of historical investigation. And I really go back to the very beginning of photography. Among the scholars who deal with photography, there are two types. So this is a rather rough sketch, but I think, however, you can say this. Those who think that photography is just a continuation of what we knew before. So photography is just like painting, it's just another form of visual representation, but there's no, I would even dare the word, ontological rupture between photography and other media. I don't think so. I belong to those scholars who think that photography is something else because it came into the world as a mechanical inscription. It's an inscription, and an inscription is something completely different than a manual representation, which, by the way, is not to say the one is better than the other, but I just would still like to insist on this difference. And one of the best sources to make this clear, at least in a historical perspective, is this wonderful book by William Henry Fox Talbot, one of the there are at least, you might know this, 20 inventors of photography, so Talbot is one of them. And the interesting thing about this book is that Talbot was in a very strange and interesting historical situation. He was the inventor of photography without knowing himself what photography is. Is it a science? Is it an art? Is it a new kind of industry? Will it be successful? That was absolutely not clear in the beginning, whether photography would be a complete flop. And we, of course, today we know what photography has become, but for Talbot this was completely unclear. This is why this book is so interesting, The Pencil of Natures, because in this book he tries to make a kind of very fundamental description of what photography is and what photography is not. The book consists of 24 photographs with corresponding text that describe the specific qualities of this new medium. And there's one passage in the book that perfectly reveals the specific historical situation that I just mentioned. It is Talbot's commentary to plate number 9 called The Ladder. So he calls this image's ladder. By the way, even this act of attributing is something new. To give a title to a photograph is something that had to be invented. It was not self-evident that you would give a photograph a title. So this photograph is called Image, and I will read you the explanation that Talbot adds to this photographs. Quote, groups of figures take no longer time to obtain than single figures would require, since the camera depicts them all at once, however numerous they may be. So I'm happy to see that some of you laugh, because this means that you got the point. For us, this seems to be a complete absurd mentioning, because it's completely clear that the camera depicts 3 persons in the same time as 300. But Talbot, and this is why I think this passage is so interesting, Talbot still thinks in the logic of painting, of drawing. And for a draftsman, of course, it would have made a huge difference whether you have to paint 2 persons or 200 or 2,000. And this is something that he had to explain to his audience, because it wasn't absolutely clear. And by the way, there is an interesting parallel to this anecdote, a remarkable anecdote that the German media historian Martin Giesecke reports in his book on the history of printing. Giesecke mentions a group of monks in the German city of Regensburg who apparently had difficulties to realize or to accept the specific qualities of automatic and mechanical book printing in contrast to copying books by hand. So what did they do? They carefully examined and controlled each single specimen that left the letterpress in order to look for individual mistakes and aberrations. So it's a little bit the same structure than in the Talbot story. They thought, okay, they couldn't, switch from this manual inscription to this. And I think that, of course, this is a very charming way to deal with this. I don't say this to make fun of it or to criticize. On the contrary, I think there's also kind of reflection in this behavior. So Talbot constantly comes back to the point to insist why photography is something specific. And of course he exaggerates, which usually in the beginning of a new media happens, that people exaggerate, but however, that doesn't mean that they are completely wrong. So, quote, the plates of the present work are impressed by the agency of light alone, without any aid whatever from the artist's pencil. They are sun pictures themselves, and not, as some persons have imagined, engravings in imitation. They are impressed by nature's hand. So, of course, this is not true. It's not true that no human being had to be involved to make these pictures. However, Talbot also says something that I still think is true, that in photography there's the moment where you do not need the presence of a human being. There's the apparatus, and by the way, Talbot's wife, Elizabeth Talbot, had very interesting metaphor for using for Talbot's camera obscura. She called them mouse traps, because literally they were like mouse traps that Talbot deposited somewhere on Lacock Abbey, his ground, and then he went away, smoking a cigar or whatever. Then he came back, and then inside there was, of course, he needed to invent the box, he needed to invent the chemicals. But however, there is a moment of inscription which I think we cannot describe with the usual way of describing, let's say, like painting or drawing. Another last quotation from Talbot, when he presented the first specimen of his photographic process to his colleagues of the Royal Institution in London, he shows them a photograph of his country house, Lacock Abbey, and he adds the following observation. In the summer of 1835, I made a great number of representations of my house in the country. And this building I believe to be the first that was ever yet known to have drawn its own picture. So here again you have the idea of the sun picture, and I mean this is an almost magic understanding of photography. It's the object itself that wanted to be a picture. Of course, absolute exaggeration, but however not completely wrong. So I think there is still something with this that distinguishes this idea of inscription from other ways of making pictures. And last aspect that Talbot stresses, and I'm mentioning all these things from the beginning because I think all these observations describe qualities of photography that even today, I would dare to say, even with artificial intelligence and so on, they play a certain role. I think sometimes scholars are too fast to get rid of this idea of photographic inscription by saying of course we are all trained social constructivists, we all know everything is a construction and so on, but I think there is a kind of resistance or physical resistance in the photographic image which is not obvious, which is not evident, which is not objective, of course, but I think however there is a moment of yes, and I will because Talbot already mentioned it. Talbot in another part of this book mentions the following, I quote, it frequently happens, and this is one of the charms of photography, that the operator himself discovers on examination, perhaps long afterwards, that he has depicted many things he had no notion of at the time. Sometimes inscriptions and dates are found upon the buildings, or printed placards most irrelevant are discovered upon their walls. Sometimes a distant dial plate is seen, and upon it, unconsciously recorded, the hour of the day at which the view was taken. So here Talbot described the phenomenon that and of course this is not true for all photographs. If you think of artist photographs like Jeff Wall, in these pictures everything would be controlled, everything would be staged. But there are other forms of photography, and I think photographic research is part of that, where this is not the case, where you still need the idea, or where you still refer to the idea, there is something of the world that entered into the picture, which doesn't, and I think this is the interesting thing in photography. It's a mixture of constructing things, but on the other hand, of accepting things to occur, so to speak. So, and now I'd like to show some examples of what photographic research might be. And again, I repeat, this is not a discipline, so you can't say there's a canon, these are the 4 major works of photographic research. But however, I will try to show you some, a little bit by random, and then I will end, 2 or 3 examples of what photographic research might be. In 1977, sorry, this is, we'll show this because, because this is the missing point to what I'm going to develop. This is a picture that Talbot shows in order to describe another aspect of photography. So he shows these objects, I think objects of his own collection, and then he says, if one day a thief would steal these images, this picture could be a mute testimony. So a court could use this image. And again, a very interesting statement, because on the one hand, it's nonsense, because no photograph is evident in itself. This photograph as such can't tell you where these objects were, who bought them, who stole them, nothing of all that. But however, it can somehow prove that these objects existed. I think even for us today, with our knowledge of artificial intelligence, it would be hard to say, no, these objects never existed. They are just an invention. They never existed. So to come back to evidence, because this is the link to the next point. So which means that, of course, the image in itself is not evidence, and evidence always needs additional techniques, texts, human beings who will tell you things about this. But however, again, I would say Talbot is not completely false in existing. This image is a kind of testimony. You need additional things, but however, this could be part of. of evidence. And now I'm referring to two artists, some of you might know this work, who I'm quite sure that they didn't know Talbot's mentioning of evidence, but however, it's an ironic reference to this, or I would say a kind of photographic research that problematizes this idea of photographic evidence. In 1977, the two artists Larry Sullivan and Mike Mandel published a series of 61 black and white photographs under the laconic title Evidence. The volume shows photographs that Sullivan and Mandel had collected in the mid-1970s during their research in the archives of various institutions, authorities, and companies in the United States. Institutions such as the California Institute of Technology, the Pasadena Police Department, the Stanford University's Physics Laboratory, the Los Angeles Fire Department, and the Highway Users Federation in Washington, D.C. In all these institutions, images were produced, classified, and archived. Photographic evidence was generated, photographs of experiments and experimental tests, pictorial documentation of damage, injuries, or accidents, all from a world of factual stock-taking that seemed far removed from the imaginative spaces of fine art. Without adding, and this is the important point now, because Mike, Mandel, and Sullivan, they belong to a generation of artists who had the idea we don't even need to produce new images because there are already so many images in the world. So our task as artists could be to comment on these images or to analyze these images. So they showed these images again, but without any context. And that's the, I think, also very funny effect of what they did. So they show these images without mentioning what their original use was, and then they became completely surrealist. They became completely absurd. And so without adding anything of their own to the photos, without captions, dating, or indication of the place of origin, the photos were printed in an illustrated book. Sorry, this one. Yeah, so here you see the name, So this is the book already titled, so Evidence in Gold, so you would think of publications like the Bible or a law. So we have this whole idea of serious evidence. And then you see these photographs without any context. I will show you some of them. We have no idea what happens here, what these men are doing. This could be an artistic installation. Yeah, completely enigmatic what happens here. So we do not know why and where these photographs were taken, nor who they show, what exactly they were intended to document, who took them, and on what occasion and why they were viewed. It is true that some recurring motifs can be identified, but all these fragments are put together so loosely that no coherent overall context emerges. So these pictures always reminded me of some science fiction films where people from other galaxies come to the world and they see what happens and they have no idea how to make sense of it. And I show this in this context of photographic research because I think this is a way of commenting by using images the idea of photographic evidence. So they don't need a written discourse, they don't need arguments, but they just do this by the gesture of moving away the context of the images, and then you start to, for example, you start to look at the images. You start to look at in another context. If you would put these images in their former context, probably they would lose their strangeness. They would lose this kind of alienation because then they are embedded in their cocon of normality, so to speak. So this just as one example of many examples that one could. Yeah, okay. This is a line of usually men, by the way, on this picture. So a series of experts. So evidently they discuss something, but again we have no idea what it is about. So I would say the gesture of photographic research in this case is exactly not to produce new photographs, but to put them in another context and made us think about what photographic evidence could be. Very short, another example, a German artist, Simon Menner, who worked with archives from the Stasi. So the following pictures are from a seminar on disguises. The picture shown here taken during a seminar in which Stasi personnel were taught how to do different disguises. The goal of the seminar was to enable Stasi agents to move about in society as inconspicuous as possible. So you can see how inconspicuous you think they were. So here again, not making new pictures, but taking these pictures from their context in order to add something new, or in order to invite us to have a look at these pictures. And another series which is called Transmitting Secret Signs. So this is from the same series. Prospective agents were taught how to convey secret signs in this seminar. And then the funny, very laconic sentence, it is no longer known what the individual signs mean. And I will show you two of them. So you see a man in a car who apparently, with his newspaper, tries to make some secret signs, or this one here. And I think it would be very interesting, by the way, to compare these pictures with artistic photography of the 70s. So here you have a photograph of Klaus Rinke. Of course, they are not the same, but here you have the interesting case that in this use of photography in this Stasi context, something occurred that somehow has a similarity to artistic practice. So that this is not what we are talking about here, photographic research, so photographic research referring to scientific, but the way around, that there's also a way in the other direction, so to speak. A last example that is a completely different one, because I don't want to give the idea that this is the typical notion of artistic research. I think that Arvid Messmer, who describes himself as a Bildarchäologe, also works in this direction. So using archives, recontextualizing image. And now I refer to a completely different context. This is a work by the Chilean artist Alfredo Jar, who, and I think this is interesting in our context, started as a photojournalist and then gave up because it was too complicated. I didn't like to make always the same photojournalistic images, and then he became an artist. And I think this move also has something to do with photographic research. In August 1994, Jar traveled to Rwanda and took over 3,000 photos of the massacres of the Tutsi. Like many of his colleagues, Jar wanted to capture the genocide on film. Upon returning to New York, he hesitated to look at these photographs, to circulate them, so as not to expose them to the indifference of an overly saturated audience. For an installation that was first shown at the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Photography, Jar finally selected 60 photographs documenting various scenes of the genocide. He had submerged his photographs in what he called a graveyard of images. So here you see a picture of this installation. The photos were hidden in black boxes that stood in the room, like gravestones, and were inscribed with inscriptions. So inside these boxes are probably, I mean, there's even no evidence if this is the case, probably were these photographs, which he didn't want to show, but he gives the inscription. I will read you one of these inscriptions. Natamara Church, Nyamata, Rwanda, 40 kilometers south of Kigali. Monday, August 29, 1994. These photographs, 94, This photograph shows Benjamin Muzizi, 15 years old, crouched low in the doorway of the church amongst scattered bodies, spilling out into the daylight. 400 Tutsi men, women, and children who had come for seeking refuge were slaughtered during a Sunday Mass. Benjamin looks directly into the camera as if recording what the camera saw. So I think this might be called another way of artistic research. First of all, the move not to go on with this photographic rhetoric, so what photojournalists do. And maybe you know the Susan Sontag's book regarding the pain of others, which is still, I think, the major publication on this very complicated question, shall we show these images? I think there are reasons why to show these images, because sometimes even the victims, they insist you have to show this because you have to prove what happens. There are other reasons against voyeurism, the fear that people would get used to it and that the images will get even more cruel. However, but Sontag, I mean, she makes a very precise analysis of this. And my last argument is that I think that Alfredo Jar adds to this discourse, but not, of course, by writing a text or by giving written arguments, but by inviting us with this installation about this problem. And this is, I think, a very subtle commentary also on the border between the visible and the invisible, because there is no close border between the invisible. We don't see this image physically, but the description, of course, will bring images in our mind. So this is, I think, a very subtle reflection on what it means to be visible, what it means to imagine images that are described. It's a very subtle reflection about the relation between word and text. So just to show, to add this as an argument that this might also be treated as a kind of photographic research. I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure that the following discussions of specific photographic works will provide a clearer idea of what photographic research can be, since looking at those images, of course, you need to. This is part of the. You need to look at these images. It's not like reading text. You really need to look at these images, because written discourse must necessarily be accompanied by viewing of images, and because seeing is a form of recognition. Thank you.
So tonight I have the pleasure of talking with Christian Joschke. Thank you for accepting my invitation. And we are going to present, to introduce ourselves. I mean, I'm going to introduce Christian. So Christian Joschke is an art historian and is particularly interested in the relationship between arts and politics and the history of photography. Today he is a professor at the École Supérieure des Beaux-arts in Paris. Between 2007 and 2020, he successfully taught as a lecturer at the Lumière Lyon 2 University and the Paris-Nanterre University. He was a research fellow at the IFK in Vienna and at the Ryerson Image Center of Toronto, and at the Independent Art History and Archaeology at Princeton and Humboldt University in Berlin. He translated books by Hans Belting, whose assistant he was in the Collège de France, and Horst Bredekamp. He published, and these are books who are available at the table, and I really recommend you to look at them. He published The Eyes of the Nation, Amateur Photography and Society in the Germany of Wilhelm II. He co-organized the photography class weapon exhibition, social and documentary photography in France, 1928-1936 at the Centre Pompidou with Florian Ebner, who is here also tonight, and founded the magazine Transporteur with Olivier Lugon, which is, for me, one of the most interesting and important magazines on photography today. Recently, which, congratulations, he just published a new book called, and I'm not going to butcher your title, I'm just going to say it in French. So, La Révolution suspendue, photographie et presse communiste dans l'Allemagne de Weimar, 1918-1933, also published by Macula.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. It's a great pleasure being here. It's a great honor talking to all of you. And I know Horst Bredekamp is also permanent fellow of the VICO, I guess. And I was very honored to be invited by him 2 years ago to teach at the Humboldt University. And I really appreciate his work. And yes, when Hannah and I planned this discussion tonight, none of us ever imagined how actual the theme would be, given the dreadful situation in the Middle East. I was supposed to act as a very innocent and naive art historian talking about documentary photography, the apparatus and layout and very formal things. And now the stakes of tonight's discussion have changed, but it might be for good. You will see many echoes to the burning issue of war in Hannah's work on the 1979 revolution in Iran, and on her work on culture of Iranian diaspora in Los Angeles. I have no doubt that this will help us understand better the history and the present day of a country that has driven the attention of the entire world. A few words on Hannah's work. Hannah Darabi belongs to a generation of artists who, like Arwed Mesmer, who is here tonight, are completely involved in collecting documents, archives, building some inquiries, acting sometimes like archaeologists or historians in order to widen up the idea of visual art, photographic production, including historical material. This, just like Peter showed us just previously. This perspective gives to the spectators of their works a distance to the visual material that fosters a kind of Brechtian distanciation, we could say, to visual documents, and that are used and sometimes reenacted in their installations. I would tend to describe this approach as a new documentary photography that sets visual materials in different levels. The historical document of popular culture, we're going to see a few. Of course, the thorough contextualization, the research, which gives some insightful information on these images, and sometimes chooses to decontextualize, just like Peter showed us. And of course, there is another level, which is the production of new photographs, of photographic material. So all these levels are levels of intervention that Hannah and also Arwed are using to give more depth to the photographic works. Hannah's approach to photography has been praised by many institutions. The BAL, which is an art center in Paris dedicated to documentary photography, presented the project Engelab Street, which we are going to talk about tonight. And this project has then been shown in many other ventures. Hannah is born in Tehran, trained at the university in Tehran for visual arts, and also at the Paris University, Paris 8, Vincennes-Saint-Denis, which you might know, that has been created in the 70s in Vincennes with Gilles Deleuze and others. She has been awarded several prizes, like the Bernd und Hilla Becher Prize of the city of Düsseldorf, another prize at the Rencontre de la Photographie in Arles, in south of France. And recently, she got the very prestigious Élysée Award of the Musée de l'Élysée in Lausanne. After the great success of the project Engelab Street, a revolution by books in Iran, 1979-1983, that had led to a fascinating publication by Spector Books here in Germany, Hannah has developed another project on Iranian diaspora in Los Angeles called Soleil of Person Square. Soleil of Person Square. Soleil is the name of a Kneipe, of a bar on Person Square in Los Angeles. So that's the reason for the title. You're going to say a few words of it, I think. I hope so. And this exhibition was presented in different places, including the Center for Photography in Geneva that has And the project has been also subject to a publication that you will see here, published by the French publisher Guinzegal. When I first encountered Hannah's work, Engelab Street, I was struck by how smart and nuanced this project was. It shows the incredible visual creativity of different oppositional movements at the eve of the Iranian Revolution, and also the reappropriation of this documentary photography and of these layout techniques, the graphic designs, by the Islamic propaganda. So it is the history of a shift, a revolution of which was meant to be an emancipation and the shift to the Islamic Republic. We all know that in the first weeks of the revolution was supported by many political tendencies in Western countries, and that the opposition to the Shah was instrumental in structuring the student movement in Europe. I say this here in Berlin because Benno Ohnesorg was killed, as you know, in a demonstration against the visit by the Shah to Berlin. Leftists were rapidly swept away by the Islamic movement of Khomeini. This history is well known, but the visual material that has been produced during this period has completely been forgotten. And Hannah's book, we see the rise of a documentary photography and the shift to visual propaganda. We can read this work on different levels. The visual setting is fascinating. The polysemic power of images is striking too, because you have images that has been used in one context and then displaced in another context, and that are supposed to provide other propaganda messages. And we also can read this work as a history of Iran, because it's so well documented that you get a real insight in what happened between 1979 and 1983. We learn very much about political history, about the chronology, about political actors. So I'm going to ask a few questions to Hannah. First, on this first publication and exhibition project, Engelab Street. And then we will have a few words on the second big project of Hannah, Soleil of Persian Square. But first, let me ask you, Hannah, when and under which circumstances did you decide to collect this visual material, and where did you find all these books?
So this project, Engelab Street, is consisted of two book collections. The first one is the Photographic, or books who use photography in a special way, and they are published during 1979 and 1983. The reason of these dates is 1979 is the date of the Iranian Revolution, and 1983 is the moment that the Ministry of Culture also opens this office, which is the Office of Islamic Values. And so the censorship in 1979, let's say that there was this opening space because there was no solidified state, so the censorship was at its minimum, and little by little it rose, and at 1983, maybe if there was a half window opened, the window kind of closed. So these photography books are published during this period, and they are mostly depicting the Iranian Revolution of 1979, but also Iran-Iraq war, which happened first year after the revolution, so very, very fast. And also I consider that it was the construct of the Iranian Revolution, and it was something that kind of helped the Iranian Republic Islamic political party to become a government then. And the second, so here are some covers of the first collection, which has about 53 titles. And the second collections are books that that are kind of coming from this tradition called white covers. They are not exactly white covers. You see that they have all this graphic design and real covers. But the white cover were books who kind of started in 1977, when also the censorship of the former regime before the Republic Islamic was very at its strongest moment. And there were two groups of political activists who would publish these books. At one hand, it was the leftists, and at the other, there were Islamists. These books, they didn't have any cover. The cover was white, and you would go to a bookshop and you would ask, for example, can I have this book in particular? And they would give it to you, and maybe they would write the name of the book by hand on the cover. And so this is also, after the revolution, these books became, they were allowed to be read. They were allowed to be also sold on the streets. And there's also these very beautiful scenes of these books that are coming. Engelab Street is that street that has the most concentration of the publishing houses and bookshops. And we see the students handing these books to the cars, to the passengers. So they have covers. Actually, they're they have the same texts as the white covers, but they have covers because these were published in 1979. And then little by little, they become also banned. So I think these collections are very much related because it shows also the importance of a book as an object in the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It was very important. And the book had like a value as a weapon. There's this quote by this Marxist activist, Shahla Shafiq, which is also a sociologist, who says, there was something extraordinary in the experience of reading a banned book, a metamorphosis of the act of reading. So I think, so the collection of books, I gathered them in Engelab Street from the second-hand bookshops. I found my first photography book really by chance because I was looking for other things, and I had no idea that there was this much publication of photography book at some point in Iran, because while I was growing up, we didn't have any opportunity of seeing them. And so the first book led to the second book, and then the question, so how many books are really out there? And I should say that we discussed, because this is kind of the thing that normally people ask about this project, that so these books are banned today. And I'm telling them no. I had very much difficulties of finding references of the existence of these books, but then I just understood that there is one place which is called Hosei Honari, which is a very we can say Islamic propaganda cultural office related to directly to the leader of the revolution. They had a very good collection of these books, but as it's a very close place, normally you won't go there. So it was there that I understood which books are actually out there. And I started to look for them. I made friends with bookshop owners. They offered me tea. I drank a lot of tea to convince them to actually sell me these books, find me these books, because surprisingly, these books were published in very numerous copies. One example, Blood Days of Fire, was published twice, 33,000 copies. I mean, this is very exceptional everywhere. But somehow they disappeared. And I'm always asking the question, what happened and why they disappeared at some point. Also maybe because of what happened after the revolution, that the books became also weapons. Once again, many people throw them out. So that's also a possibility. But also I'm wondering if they were like, say, like painting books, would they, like photography was like something that maybe it wasn't that valuable to people to have them. So yeah, so the books are coming from bookshops in Iran. None of them were found online, for example, while I was in France. I think it's important to know that they are collected by one of the people who helped me, very strange man, to find these books was a collector with a very specific Islamic ideology, but generous to give me information. And so these books they are not, well, I mean, they are now rare books. There are also, I think I gathered them because aesthetically they are very interesting, and some of them are really amazing how they were made, but they are not objects of collection. I mean, I corrupted them now, but they weren't objects of collection at the time that I was.
Maybe they will become objects of collection. Days of Blood and Days of Fire was published twice, 35,000 copies, you said?
33.
33,000 copies.
There is a version
and
of 35 also.
It was planned to be a third publication, which was non-authorized by the state, so it stopped at that point. So you have these two collections. You have the samizdat, which we'd call here in Russia or somewhere else, the private texts, photocopies of mostly Marxist literature, and the others are books which are very creative, very well laid out, very incredibly fascinating and powerful in the use of images and text, and this is the second part of, well, actually the first part of your book, but so you have these two different kind of publications. Could you tell us a little bit more about who were these photographers, and asking you questions about the material, and then we switch also to your way of dealing with this material, but just to stay a little bit more on the books themselves. Could you tell us more about the photographers and the publisher? Who were they? What kind of political or artistic position did they have? Do you have maybe a few names or?
Sure. So let's start with Days of Blood. I think there is this variety of people, like photographers, publishers, and also people who weren't photographers, but they just use photography to communicate some kind of message or some kind of idea about the revolution. So when the Iranian Revolution of 79, sorry, there are so many, that happened, documentary photography already existed in the Iranian, I can say, cultural and art scene, but it wasn't really praised as a kind of art. And this event, 1979, the revolution and then war, really gave a necessity to the photographers at the time who believed really strongly that photography and documentary photography has the power of showing us what's happening. And even when we go to the photographers of the war, they thought soldiers have weapons, we have cameras. So for them, photography had that kind of resistance and as a battle tool. So, for example, I have some examples of I chose a selection of books who are in the collection, so you would also understand the variety of ideology or approach to the photography. Days of Blood, Days of Fire is the most, we can say, photographic book, which is published by Zamine, which was the first and the only photography publishing house of the time, and it didn't last much.
Owned by Emima, someone called Emima?
Emami.
Emami, sorry.
He was also very important. I mean, it's good that you're mentioning that, Karim Emami, because he was a very important person in the cultural scene. He started working at the Franklin publishing house. So Franklin kind of was very important to the Iranian publishing scene, and kind of also, well, okay, it's an American publishing house, but also it was responsible of kind of also teaching a lot, creating this generation of people who dealt with publishing later. And Emami was one of them. He was an art and cinema critic who would write before the revolution in the cultural magazines. And he started this after the revolution, and he gathered all these documentary photographers, but most important of them would be Bahman Jalali, because also he's very well known in Germany. And Bahman Jalali was already established photographer. And he wrote, for example, for this book, a little text at the beginning and says what is good photography. And for him, the good photography is maybe one of the first definition of the social documentary photography, which should be something that brings you the truth of an event. And so Days of Blood and Days of Fire were put together photographs and text, and I think the graphic design is truly amazing. I really like it. But also the intelligence that maybe the photographs themselves, they're not enough. Somehow, still, I mean, they thought that it's kind of a contradiction, because they thought photography is good enough, but still they needed text to reanimate the photographs. And the photographs of this book are Bahman Jalali, and the second person who has the most photographs is Rana Javadi. Another book that is an opposite example of that, really opposite example, would be this book, that The Tulip Revolution, a memoir of martyr, which is a book that put together all these photographs that supposed, the main idea of the book would be martyrdom, and also reflecting of all these people who lost their lives during the revolution of 1979. The amazing thing is that the variety of people who were considered martyrs, they could be a clergy Islamist, it could be Mossadegh as I mean, he was never a martyr, but it's
former minister of the Shah, died in 1953 in exile.
And he wasn't, but people consider him as a martyr. So also a very free interpretation of what constitutes a martyr. And the manner they used photography is, most of these photographs are very well known, like iconic photography of the revolution, but well, they're poor quality. I don't know how they make this. I mean, today we have all these techniques of making this kind of publication, but these colors are amazing, but they made it somehow because maybe they didn't have like a full color budget. And there's no mention of who is the photographer, where is the place. So documentary photographer not doing its job at all in this publication. And then the book that we both love is this epic of the revolution of 1979. Also a very artistic interpretation, a collage, which kind of also remind me of like the situationist approach to the photography.
Absolutely.
A combination of text and image. We don't know who are the artists behind that. For example, in this case, the artists are anonymous. We just know the two-person, the graphic designers who put together. Maybe also we don't need an artist. It's just maybe it's considered as a publication of graphic design. And this one is also a self-published book. So once again, no publishing house, by Kaveh Golestan and Mohammad Sayyad, which were both very, very important to the Iranian documentary photography scene. And they put together all these fantastic photographs, which are very there are lots of blood and fire, and it's another approach. For example, if you had time to see, for example, Bahman and Rana Javadi approach to this subject, these are quite different. And they decided to publish this. None of them, for example, were for a particular political ideology. They used to work for the magazines, cultural magazines of the time, and they just put together this book to show what's happening during the revolution. Talking about the ideology, for example, this book, I'm very curious about it, because I think at the end, when I see the authors, which is not also very clear, I think they might have like tendencies for one political party of the time, which was Mujahedin, a communist Islamist party. So very different also. And then this book also, we don't know who is the author is. It says Saeed, which is just the name of a person, so it can be Saeed who, we don't know. And it visualized all these slogans on the walls of the time of Tehran. And the book is actually very beautifully made and very modest, but very interesting. And when I was showing this book to Shahla Shafiq, which I mentioned earlier, she lived the revolution, and then she kind of fled to Paris because she was in danger of being imprisoned. So she would go through the pages and she would read the slogans, and she would say, these were the Islamists, these were the communists, these were the Marxists. So the book is a history of the revolution, but it's not showing any movement of the protest. It's very quiet. In comparison, for example, with this book, which is not quiet at all. We have all these, we hear the sound of the revolution shouting, and also maybe the sound of the weapons being shot. As this one, the streets are empty. Maybe it's very early in the morning, or I don't know how at that time he made this, maybe he's a he, made these photographs, but it's very quiet. Mm-hmm. And then once we go through these publications, that goes the years of, also this one, maybe I go quickly because I'm talking a lot, maybe we can discuss them later, which is about the war and self-publication. But then we have, when the books, you see this one, 1982, when we progress towards 1983, so you see that the window is closing, and the books who are published at this period are mostly published by this Islamist. This one is a bad example because it's self-published, but they are published by the very Islamist, and one particular, like the cultural Islamic value would publish most of the books and control the image circulating of the war. As also today, you mentioned the Middle East war, I was just reading about the do's and don'ts of what kind of image we can publish about what's happening in Tehran, for example, or in Iran. So this book is very much also allied with the Islamist ideology, so it's kind of the perfect example of those kind of publications.
You can see the aesthetics, which is completely different from the other books. The black is a dominant color. You have many religious signs or religious hints to religion, or martyrs who are praised by the movement. So this is an incredible portrait of Iran during this time, and the shift from one explosive culture, visual culture of revolution, to something that is becoming the state propaganda of the Islamic Republic. Do you think, when you see these books and also the early books, do you think there is some kind of link to what we have experienced a few months ago, more than a year ago, with the uprising, woman, life and freedom, and the incredible visual agitprop, I should say, the visual production that has that came out of this movement that was unfortunately repressed by the government. Do you see? Does that is that enlightening us this kind of new documents? Do you see the relationship between the two moments, or?
There is definitely a relationship. These images were also they circulate they circulated in the country. I mean, I've never seen them in the book form before 2015, but I've seen them over and over again during, for example, the anniversary of the revolution. Each year, we would have for many days these programs on the TV who would show over and over these slideshows of these images. Not exactly those images, but kind of like similar images, and some of them, I knew them very well. I was never interested of also knowing at that time who took the photographs, because for me it was simply a propaganda photography. But then I now understood that they weren't necessarily propaganda photography. They became propaganda photography because I was watching them through the national TV. And so I guess my generation and the generation after, we kind of received this unwanted education, aesthetic education of this kind of photography. And also how the documentary photography became really important and something after the 1979. There was this generation of photographers who were very crucial for the illustration of publications during the reformist era. And that was maybe the only moment during the Republic Islamic time that we had this concentration, this big number of newspapers. And those people learned how to use photography to say things without saying them, which is very much goes also with the Iranian poetry tradition. We are always saying things, but we are not saying them because we are always subject of these authoritarian governments. And during the woman life movement, it's very different from what's the problem with the woman life movement was that we didn't have paper press. The people didn't have neither time nor tools of like doing books. And also there are very younger people. I don't know if they know what's a book, but yeah. But you understand how they come over and over again to some of those like ideas, which was also in the books of Revolution of 1979. For example, there we see the images of the martyrs, and it really reminds me the other book with the images of the martyrs. So the necessity of what Peter said about should we show the image of the pain. So in this case, showing the image of pain, people being killed, because these are images circulating on Instagram. You are not sure exactly who are behind these channels. I should tell you that, but you can still analyze some things, and these were images that I wouldn't share because I thought, why should we do that? But at the same time, people would do that because they thought we should remember these people who were killed during the woman life movement. And that's coming also, there was a form of appropriation, because if after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, a martyr was referred to someone who was killed during Iran-Iraq war and with a very specific ideology, then now we are the new martyrs, and now we are like we are getting this we can say title again for ourselves. And the other images are also reminding me of the image, because they were also very much as act of resistance writing slogans. They were a very active movement of people writing slogans during the night or during the evening, and government erasing them during the day. So there are all these also kind of, which is also sometimes the government really, the city of Tehran created some kind of graffiti out of one, which is very creative. And there are many also images who were circulating, which reminds me of the other book about the graffitis and slogans on the wall.
I should mention a book the École des Beaux-arts de Paris published during the Women, Life and Freedom Revolution about all graphic production of this movement, which is very rich and impressive. So we now understand more what Peter has defined as photographic research. So I would like to switch to your practice, to the way you are dealing with photography and the way you are displaying all these images. So there is this very documentary level on collecting images, documenting them, contextualizing the printed photos that you're collecting. But the manner, the way in which you set up the exhibition gives us a completely different image of what a photo exhibition used to be in the past, also in the documentary tradition. Photo during the past decades, isolating photos on the walls. Here you are setting up a very various, very manifold and extremely exciting material. You're organizing walls of pictures that refer to the different statuses of the images. How did you come to use this perspective on photographic production? You're producing an exhibition, using material, and displaying it your own way, contextualizing sometimes and sometimes not, sometimes adding your own photographs. And all this has two major venues: the exhibition place, so the wall, the vitrine, and on the other hand, the book, which is also a kind of a creation with this material. How did you come to do that? Have you experienced any influences by major photographers who are exploding the frames of traditional photo exhibitions? Can you tell us a little bit more about the way of displaying photographs?
Well, I mean, we mentioned Brecht, so his war journals are like very much was kind of one of my references at the time, like working on this project. But also, I was also very much impressed by Godard and how he uses documents in his. I mean, I think he had a lot for me to be comfortable with using documents and also giving them new meanings, and not always be very much concerned of saying what exactly each photograph is telling you. Then that's something we expect from photography, but more from documentary photography, to tell us a story, to tell us what are you seeing, and also put everything in a good order. And then, but also when we discussed this subject together, I told you that there was also in this project, there was something that was new to me. It was, I already worked with it, but it was kind of new, mixing, because I was also doing all these photographic series in my work, and mixing all these different photographic approaches, as we can see here, was very new for me. And maybe one of the German photographers who kind of influenced me, despite his work is very different from what I'm doing, is Wolfgang Tillmans, that has this way of putting everything together and somehow make all these connections between photographs, so sometimes I'm very much like has this influenced by photographers who are close to what I'm doing. And then sometimes it's very, it can be something that is very, very far, but it gives me comfort of dealing with the images. And for example, you mentioned also book to the exhibition. Now we have like these, we have two spreads of the book. And you would see this part in the book published by Spectre Books and Lobel, like this, and the exhibition will be really different. So in the book, you have this possibility of confronting one image to other. Here, there's two spreads. And for example, for me, I can give you the example of the image that you are seeing with the soldier, with the teenage soldier, which is also a very important subject of the Iran-Iraq war, that there was this feelings of necessity of saving the country, and it was very important for everyone to go to war, and there was this huge number of teenage boys who wanted to go to war, and no one kind of stopped them, and somehow it wasn't allowed, but somehow they went to the war. And when you are seeing that there is one image of the boy, which is published on the top, the black and white, is published in the book of the photographer Alfred Yaqubzadeh, and it's just a full page spread, and we see the boy going forward with a weapon which is heavier probably than himself. And on the bottom, this is the spread coming from one of my art books in high school. Elementary school. So I knew this image. I've seen it like 100 times.
This one?
No. Yeah, the one with the caption that says, "We will fight till victory."
This one, yeah.
Yeah, the little one
Same
here.
picture.
Yeah, which is also in the conversation of other images. So not only there is a caption who defines a very specific reading of this image, it kind of imposes heroism. It imposes that, I mean, this boy, he became really, really well known to the point that he lost his name. Now we know him as Hassan Jangju, Hassan the fighter, so he doesn't have a real name anymore. And this picture was kind of responsible for that, and there are many of these. And this picture is also in conversation with other materials, one of them with the image of the woman, and the caption says, "Death to Saddam." And the other one also, the images, that image showing the misery and also the suffering of the war. So for me, it was the perfect example of how this documentary image can be read differently according to where it is and how it is shown. So that's how you see it in the book. And in the exhibition area, not only the image is in, so it's, I don't know if you see it, like it's there on the second row in the middle. It's not only it has this conversation with one or two or three another images, but there is also this constellation of all the images that are coming all together. And so it was also a big question how people react to this constellation. And one of the interesting reactions that I got, because there is always this anxious feeling about, am I giving enough information? Am I giving too much information? What should I keep and what should I not? There are also text, but the text has nothing to do with it. There is no caption. So the idea was not to repeat this game that we have with documentary image that have image and the caption that goes exactly with the image. So the image are put into conversation with other sources to reveal something else. So we have also the image of this tradition, Shi'i tradition of that we have during the ceremony of the sheet, the third sheet imam, and it's put in conversation with the image of the boy that has this holy face and but all red, so the blood is. So one person told me what I'm seeing in this person who wasn't a specialist of the Iranian revolution or Iranian history would also like read these images by the colors. And I'm mentioning this because the red you can, and that was fantastic for me because you have red here, here, and they are kind of related. So you have the liberty of following the images in this sense and kind of, and the goal was not to also, these images coming from different narratives of the Iranian Revolution. The goal for me was not to create a new narrative, but it was to talk about the experience of my generation. And so another person, you would probably make another narrative of the revolution, but because everyone has kind of an education, that's also the thing about photography, that not everyone might have an education about like painting, reading the paintings or drawings, but photography is something that everyone has seen and had things that they understand. So,
so you're confident in the spectators to put their own input on the readings of these images. I'm happy that you mentioned Wolfgang Tillmans because he just opened a gorgeous exhibition in Paris, which has been already well remarked by many spectators in the Centre Pompidou due to Florian Ebner, who is here. And all these influences, Brecht, Godard, Tillmans, that allow you to go beyond the traditional photo exhibition. I would like to switch to our last point and then open up the discussion. That is the project that I have seen in Geneva, actually, the Soleil of Persian Square, which tells a completely different story, the story of the Iranian diaspora in Los Angeles. And there is one very funny thing in this exhibition, you reproduce here these audio cassettes of Iranian music that are sold unofficially in Iran, but produced in Los Angeles by the Iranian diaspora. So the Los Angeles is sending this, was in the 80s and 90s, sending this music to Iran. The way you tackle the subject of Iranian diaspora in Los Angeles and is illustrated in the way in the title that you gave or the world that you mentioned, Tehran Angeles, which is a contraction of Tehran and Los Angeles, and that says a lot about the comparison that you do. You make many pictures of urban landscapes in Los Angeles and in Tehran, and if you don't read the captions, you are unable to say if it's Tehran or Los Angeles, because Tehran has urbanized in the same way as the West Coast in the U.S. And again, you're using traditional documentary photography of urban landscapes, portraits, and then adding to that a collection, an incredible collection of popular visual culture and musical culture too. So there are again these different levels of telling this story that interact with each other.
I'm very happy that you mentioned the cassettes first because the second object that was very important to the revolution was cassettes. And we would receive, yes, true that after the revolution of '79, that kind of popular music became not allowed, banned. So we couldn't, all the actors of the Iranian popular music, they escaped to America and strangely to Los Angeles for some reason. They never went elsewhere, which is very also funny. That's one of the questions in this project. And as you said, maybe they had, for me, one of the hypotheses would be maybe it has something to do with the urban construction. And maybe there was something familiar, despite that the Los Angeles today is very different from Tehran today, but still there are some elements that are kind of very familiar, and you can feel it, but you don't know what it is, so it's there. And these cassettes, I found them in music shops in Tehran, this neighborhood, which is like a very specific neighborhood that is marked by this sign that says Persian Square, and there is no square, there is just a Persian Square, so it's fantastic. It's like very imaginary. Even the sign is lying to you. There is no square. So we would receive, as you said, these cassettes, the kind of the one that has been copied and brought to us with many difficulties, but they didn't have covers. So those were also white cover cassettes. So there were no covers, and someone would write on them, and we would have all these cassettes that were like one album, and then somebody would record on them, so there would be another name coming. And for me, it was very also interesting to actually...
but these have covers.
These are made in Los Angeles.
So yeah, okay.
They have covers, and for me, it was fantastic to discover them because it wasn't... So then the music wasn't just about the sound. It was about also this visual culture that was built around this particular Iranian music produced in Los Angeles that has all these different also layers, musically very different, very creative than from the pop music before the revolution. So they figured that they should change the music, but also that was the music that was also very much in connection with the diaspora feeling. So the nostalgia, the feeling of losing the homeland, and also wanting to build something new, and also, well, we don't have time to say what was the new ideology of the diaspora at the time. But these covers were fantastically depicting that, visualizing that ideas. Very simple, but they had everything that I needed. So, also there are other materials that also speaks to that purpose, which are Iranian yellow pages. These are all, as you can see from the picture, the exhibition view, we have all these images of the city, Tehran, so that's where everything happens. And then you have a much closer look to the Iranian diaspora culture through these documents and vernacular documents or the cassette tapes, which shows you what the Iranian diaspora wants, how they see themselves, and how are their relation to this new land also, which is very different. So, yes, I think.
Oh, you can show the cassettes maybe bigger here.
Yeah.
You have like very incredibly 80s layout of portraits, and if you see the haircuts everything is like, yeah,
the costumes
very much
are
80s.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, 80s and 90s. These are. I also. It's good that you're saying, because that's the dates of the cassette, because I kind of collected the ones that correspond to my teenage years. So
90s, obviously.
Oh, sure.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you, Alain.